The Whispering Shadows. The night had settled over the old town like a thick blanket, the kind that stifles breath and makes even the bravest of souls uneasy. A full moon hung in the sky, casting its pale light over the eerie landscape. On the outskirts of the town, nestled between the gnarled trees of an ancient forest, stood the abandoned Holloway Manor. Its stone walls were weathered, its windows shattered, and its gates were rusted with age. Few dared approach the manor, and even fewer spoke its name. For as long as anyone could remember, the manor had been rumored to be haunted. Locals whispered of strange happenings, disembodied whispers in the dead of night, shadowy figures lurking at the windows, and lights flickering in the darkness when no one was around. It was said that those who ventured too close never returned the same, if they returned at all. Eleanor, a young woman with a curious mind and a taste for adventure, had heard the stories her whole life, but she had never been one to believe in ghosts. She was a rational person, grounded in the world of logic and science. The supernatural was just a myth, something to be laughed at, not feared. So when her friends dared her to spend a night in Holloway Manor, she accepted without hesitation. Armed with nothing but a flashlight, her phone, and her unshakable confidence, Eleanor set off towards the manor just as the clock struck midnight. The forest was thick with fog, and the ground beneath her feet was soft with fallen leaves. As she approached the manor, the wind howled through the trees, adding an eerie soundtrack to the night. The gates creaked as she pushed them open, and a chill ran down her spine. Eleanor shook off the sensation, telling herself it was just the cold. She stepped inside the overgrown yard, the grass beneath her feet swishing as she walked. The house loomed before her, dark and imposing, like a giant watching her every move. The front door was ajar, as if inviting her inside. She hesitated for a moment, but then pushed the door open and entered. The inside of the manor was just as decayed as the outside. Dust coated the furniture, cobwebs clung to the corners, and the air smelled of mold and age. But despite the decay, there was something oddly captivating about the place. It felt as though the house was alive, its walls holding secrets that had been buried for decades. Eleanor shone her flashlight around the room, the beam of light illuminating old portraits hanging crookedly on the walls. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, though there was no one there. She chalked it up to nerves, but the sensation lingered. As she ventured deeper into the manor, the air grew colder and the silence grew thicker. The only sound was the creaking of the floorboards beneath her feet. She passed through the grand hallway and entered a large sitting room, where a faded velvet couch sat by a cold fireplace. A large mirror hung on the wall opposite her, its surface tarnished by time. Eleanor moved closer to the mirror, her curiosity piqued. As she gazed into its reflection, she saw something that made her heart skip a beat. In the corner of the room, barely visible in the dim light, stood a figure, a shadowy silhouette, too real to be a trick of the light, but too ethereal to be a living person. Her breath caught in her throat. She turned quickly, expecting to find the room empty, but there was no one there. Panic began to rise in her chest. She backed away from the mirror, her heart racing. The air felt thick, oppressive, as though the house itself were closing in on her. And then she heard it, the faintest whisper, almost inaudible, but unmistakably clear. "Leave, now!" The voice was cold, like ice scraping against her soul. Eleanor spun around, but the room was still empty. She swallowed hard, trying to steady her breathing. This was nothing more than her imagination running wild, she told herself. The stories, the legends, they had to be just that, stories. But the whisper came again, louder this time. "Leave, or stay forever." A shiver ran down Eleanor's spine as a shadow flickered at the edge of her vision. She turned to face it, but again there was nothing there, just the empty room and the weight of something unseen pressing against her chest. Her flashlight flickered, casting erratic shadows on the walls. The whispering voices grew louder, now a chorus of distant, mournful wails. Eleanor felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. She couldn't explain it, but something was terribly wrong. The floor beneath her feet groaned as if the house itself was shifting. The mirror in front of her seemed to distort, the reflection warping in a way that made her stomach churn. It was as though the glass was no longer a mirror, but a gateway, one that led to something dark and malevolent. Without thinking, Eleanor turned and fled. Her feet pounded against the floor as she raced down the hallway, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The whispers followed her, echoing off the walls, growing louder and more insistent. She could feel the temperature drop with each step, the air growing colder as if something were chasing her. She burst through the front door, nearly tripping over the threshold as she scrambled into the yard. The fog had thickened, and the trees seemed to bend inwards, as though reaching out to trap her. Eleanor didn't dare look back, but she could hear the whispers in the distance, growing fainter but still present, like a presence that would never leave her. She stumbled through the forest, desperate to escape the oppressive feeling that clung to her like a shadow. Her heart was pounding in her chest, and every step felt like it was leading her deeper into some unseen nightmare. When she finally emerged from the trees and onto the familiar road, she collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. The moon hung high above, casting its eerie light on the quiet town. Eleanor looked back toward the manor, her heart still racing. The fog had dissipated, and the house stood silent and still in the distance, its windows dark and lifeless. But Eleanor knew better now. The house wasn't empty. It never had been, and as she walked away, she could still hear the faintest whisper on the wind, carried from Holloway Manor. "You will never be free."